A new intelligence report suggests China might invade Taiwan in just a few months. Will that actually happen? Taiwan is preparing for the worst-case scenario. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. YouTube has been trying to suppress China Uncensored and promote pro-CCP content, but we're fighting back and winning. Join me in Operation Honeypot Phase 3. Leave a honeypot comment to show YouTube we've got engagement, and subscribe to our free newsletter to subvert YouTube's censorship. The link is below. So for years, China has been increasing the size and scope of military activity around Taiwan. But the question has always been if and when China will actually try to invade. For many years, some analysts in the US and Taiwan estimated that China might try to invade Taiwan as early as 2027. But now, anonymous intelligence sources have told the 1945 news website that China will launch an invasion of Taiwan in the next few months. This is the one time in history no one is excited to see a government complete a project ahead of schedule. Now, it's impossible to know if this information is accurate, especially when it's coming from unnamed, anonymous intelligence sources who have spoken to 1945. Heck, that doesn't even tell us what country the intelligence sources are from. But in light of trade tensions and President Trump's tariffs on China, the CCP has said it is ready for any type of war and will fight till the end. So there might be something to this? Those same intelligence sources say that the Chinese invasion will come from the Chinese Communist Party's belief that the United States administration will be either unwilling or unable to come to Taiwan's defense. So is it true that the CCP believes that? Who knows? But one thing is devastatingly clear. The CCP is increasingly ready, and they've been working towards an invasion for years, with military drills around Taiwan that just keep pushing closer and closer to the island. The most recent being Strait 2025A, which began on March 31st. This was supposedly a response to Taiwan President William Lai calling the CCP a hostile foreign force in early March. But it's also part of what's called China's gray zone warfare, where they push boundaries more and more to see what they can get away with without triggering a boots-on-the-ground war. Gray zone warfare also covers the many recent incidents of undersea cable cutting near Taiwan, something that Russia and China are also alleged to have done in the Baltic Sea. This playbook is not new. Indeed, some of China's force buildup and drills near Taiwan look eerily similar to the Russian buildup right before the invasion of Ukraine. Not surprising, since the CCP loves copying other countries' plans. So if the CCP were to attack Taiwan this year, what would it look like? Well, according to retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Chuck DeVore, who also served as a Republican California representative, there are three ways it could go down: a patient choke, a lightning grab, or full chaos. So, let's get into it. Number 1, a patient choke. The first way is a full-on blockade, which the Chinese Navy has practiced in drills over and over again. Honestly, if they finally do invade, it'll be hours before anyone realizes it's not just another drill, which is by design. DeVore says this would ring the island like a steel noose, turning the Taiwan Strait into a kill zone. Of course, 90% of Taiwan's food and all its natural gas come by ship. Snip that lifeline and the island will starve for months. No invasion, no blood-soaked beaches, just a slow strangulation. That would pose a serious dilemma for Taiwan's allies, because using military action to breach the blockade could look like an act of aggression that Beijing could use to justify an all-out war. Because as everyone knows, the person using a steel noose to try and strangle and starve people to death is obviously the victim. This is the scenario being acted out in Strait 2025A. But it's also a gamble for the CCP. Because if Taiwan doesn't cave to the pressure, a blockade leaves the PLA just sitting there, waiting for the rest of the world to make any move it wants. Number 2, a lightning grab. The second option would be an outright attack on Taiwan, where missiles overwhelm and pummel the country's air defense systems and military facilities, while the island comes under cyber attack. At the same time, 100,000 plus PLA troops could land on Taiwanese beaches for a ground invasion, made easier by these recently revealed amphibious invasion barges that extend a handy bridge for the invaders. If done quickly enough, this could leave the rest of the world scrambling, and it would place the same dilemma on Taiwan's allies as Scenario 1. Would they risk a military response if portions of the island, especially the capital, were already occupied? Or would they just settle for imposing sanctions on Beijing? This is also being acted out in Strait Thunder 2025A, since the blockade is accompanied by military strikes. Then there's number 3, full chaos. This doomsday scenario is the most worrying for everyone involved. You can tell since it's called the doomsday scenario. This would see China still attack Taiwan, but also attack U.S. military bases in places like the Philippines, Guam, and Japan, making it much harder for even local U.S. military forces to be able to assist. While this is happening, the CCP would also carry out cyber attacks on the U.S. power grid and critical infrastructure. And to keep the U.S. even busier, it could activate the tens of thousands of Chinese military-aged men that have illegally entered the U.S. over the years, teaming up with Mexican cartels to sow chaos internally. This could delay or even prevent the U.S. from sending its military to help Taiwan fight off an invasion. This is actually very similar to a plan Germany had to keep the U.S. out of World War I, because like I said, the CCP loves stealing ideas from other countries. Back in 1917, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, which proposed German-Mexican cooperation for Mexico to recapture territories it lost to the U.S., thus keeping Washington out of the war in Europe. London handed the letter over to Washington, and we all know how that ended. And if you don't, the TLDR is not well for Germany. Twice. Which is why this doomsday scenario is an enormous gamble for the CCP. Should the U.S. discover evidence that this is being planned before it's carried out, it might have an easier time rallying its allies against Beijing, both when it comes to sanctions, tariffs, and defending Taiwan, since they can invoke the doctrine of "you started it." So why do these intelligence sources think the CCP will invade this year? Well, the CCP's rhetoric has gotten more bellicose.
正告民进党当局，螳臂当车，只能自取灭亡，早晚要来收了你。
And more ridiculous. Really, China? Really? And much of the world, including the US, is more focused on the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. After the White House blow-up with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier this year, a few analysts believed that Trump would embrace isolationism and end rounds of talks, which could look like weakness to the Chinese Communist Party. But the director of the American Institute in Taiwan, who is the de facto U.S. ambassador to Taiwan, reiterated that the Trump administration wants a ceasefire in Ukraine precisely so that it can prioritize the Indo-Pacific, and that our focus remains on deterring a conflict from erupting. That is our #1 objective in the region. Taiwan's recent increase in investments in the American economy might also be buying goodwill in Washington. The U.S. has already sent Taiwan hundreds of millions of dollars worth of military aid, and Taiwan regularly conducts military drills of its own, which China is furious about since, as we all know, they're clearly the victims here. In fact, this year's annual Hanquang drills, targeting China's gray zone actions and invasion threat, were bigger, badder, and better than ever before. This year, Taiwan called up 20,000 reservists for the exercise, which will last for a total of 2 weeks compared to last year's 8 days. According to Taiwanese Defense Minister Wellington Koo, this year's exercises are based on a hypothetical Chinese invasion in 2027. The year the U.S. and Taiwan originally estimated China might try to carry out an invasion. And there are reasons to believe that the CCP will not attack any earlier than that. One reason is that Beijing is suffering economically, especially following all of Trump's tariffs. And launching an unpredictable war could make the situation worse. Although some fear if China's economic situation gets bad enough, it could also push the CCP to do something drastic to maintain power. But there are also sentimental reasons, because the CCP is all about image. Xi Jinping will turn 74 in 2027, which also marks the start of his 4th term in office, the 12th year of his ongoing military reform program, and the 100th anniversary of the PLA being created. So I'll bet he'll want to kick off the celebrations with plenty of fireworks. If you like this episode, remember to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter so you can get notified about all of our episodes, even the ones YouTube doesn't tell you about. The link is below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.